What if I told you that the moment you stopped feeling the storm inside was not the moment you make sure others understood you correctly. You have been carrying the belief that if you could just articulate your point clearly enough, if you could just make them see, then you would be safe, then you would be valued, then you would matter. And so you argued, you explained, you justified, you repeated yourself until your voice grew hoarse, until the conversation became a battlefield, until you could no longer remember what you were even fighting for. But now, in the calm after chaos, that urgency has disappeared. You sit across from someone who is trying to provoke you, who is pushing the old buttons, and you feel nothing. Or rather, you feel something, but is not the old reactivity. It is more like a distant curiosity, as if you were watching a play you once starred in, but no longer have a role in. You see the pattern they're trying to activate, the dynamic they're trying to recreate, and you realize that you are no longer available for it. Not because you have decided to be mature or evolved, but because the part of you that needed that dynamic has dissolved. This is what happens when a pattern breaks. The roles you once played lose their charge. The scripts you once followed no longer make sense. And in the absence of that old structure, you are left with a kind of spaciousness that feels both liberating and terrifying. Because if you are not the person who defends, who explains, who fights to be understood, then who are you? You might notice this in other areas too. You stop checking your phone every 5 minutes to see if someone responded. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head, imagining what you will say if they bring up that topic again. You stop feeling the need to prove that you are okay, that you have healed, that you're doing better now. And in the absence of all that effort, you feel lighter, yes, but also strangely empty. Because the chaos you were living in was also a kind of fuel. It gave you something to do, something to focus on, something to organize your days around. And now that it is gone, you are left with the question of what to do with all this energy that used to go toward defending yourself. Jung would say that this is the moment when the persona begins to loosen its grip. The persona is the mask we wear, the role we play to fit into the world, to be acceptable, to avoid rejection. It is not false, exactly, but it is not the whole truth either. It is the version of ourselves we have constructed to survive, to belong, to make sense of our place in the social order. And for a long time, we believe that this is who we are. We believe that the mask is the face. But when the pattern breaks, when the chaos stops, the persona begins to crack. And in the quiet that follows, we start to sense that there is something else beneath it, something we have not yet met. This can be deeply unsettling, because the persona is not just a mask we put on for others. It is also the structure we use to understand ourselves. It is the story we tell about who we are, what we value, what we want. And when that story starts to fall apart, when the roles we played no longer fit, we are left in a kind of liminal space, a threshold between the old self and something new that has not yet taken shape. And in that space, we feel unsteady. We feel like we are losing ourselves. But what is actually happening is that we are being asked to let go of the version of ourselves that was never quite true, so that something deeper can emerge. The second sign is this. You start to feel bored by things that used to excite you. Not in a depressed way, not in a way that feels like loss, but in a way that feels like outgrowing. You notice this when you open a book that you loved a year ago and find that you cannot get past the first chapter. Or when you scroll through social media and realize that the content that used to captivate you now feels hollow, repetitive, performative. Or when you sit down to watch a show that everyone is talking about and find that you are not interested, that you cannot bring yourself to care about the drama, the plot twists, the character struggles. At first, you might worry that something's wrong with you. You might think you are becoming cynical, or numb, or disconnected. You might try to force yourself to engage, to feel the way you used to feel, to find meaning in the things that once gave you meaning. But the more you try, the more you realize that the connection is simply not there anymore. It is not that the things have changed. It is that you have changed. And the part of you that used to resonate with those things has gone quiet. This is one of the most disorienting aspects of the calm after chaos, because we tend to define ourselves by our interests, our passions, our preferences. We say, I'm the kind of person who loves this, who cares about that, who gets excited by these things. And when those things no longer move us, we feel like we're losing our identity. We feel like we are becoming a stranger to ourselves. But what is actually happening is that the pattern we were living inside of is broken. and the things that fit that pattern no longer fit who we are becoming. You might notice this in your relationships too. Conversations that used to energize you now feel draining. Friends who used to make you laugh now seem to be repeating the same stories, the same complaints, the same observations. You find yourself nodding along, but inside, you are distant. You are somewhere else. And you start to wonder if you are becoming judgmental, if you are losing your capacity for connection, if you are closing yourself off. But the truth is, you are not closing off. You are simply no longer available for the dynamic that those relationships were built on. Jung spoke about this as the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming who you actually are rather than who you were conditioned to be. And one of the most difficult parts of this process is the loneliness that comes with it. Because as you change, as the old patterns break, you start to realize that many of your relationships were based on a shared pattern, a shared way of seeing the world, a shared set of assumptions about what matters. And when you step out of that pattern, when you can no longer participate in it with the same energy, those relationships begin to shift. Some of them deepen, some of them fade, and some of them end, not because of conflict or betrayal, but simply because the ground you were standing on together has disappeared. This can feel like grief, and it is grief, but it is also something else. It is the grief of letting go of a version of yourself that you thought you needed to be. It is the grief of realizing that the life you were building, the goals you were chasing, the dreams you were holding on to, were not actually yours. They were the dreams of the persona, the mask, the role you were playing. And now that the pattern is broken, now that the chaos has gone quiet, you are left with the question of what you actually want, who you actually are, when no one is watching, when there is no script to follow, when there is no external validation to chase. And this is where the third sign appears. You stop trying to figure it out, not because you have given up, but because you have realized that the need to figure it out was part of the pattern that broke. For so long, you have been living with the belief that if you could just understand what went wrong, if you could just identify the root cause, if you could just find the right framework or the right insight, then everything would make sense. Then you would know what to do. Then you would be able to move forward. And so you read the books, you listen to the podcasts, you went to therapy, you journaled, you analyzed, you reflected. You tried to piece together the narrative of your life in a way that made sense, in a way that gave you control, in a way that promised that if you did the work, you would get the result. And for a while, this felt productive. It felt like progress. It felt like you were doing something, like you were taking responsibility, like you were healing. But now, in the calm after chaos, you realize that all that effort to figure it out was also a way of avoiding something. It was a way of staying in your head, of keeping the experience at a distance, of trying to manage the unknown by turning it into a problem that could be solved. And the moment you stop trying to figure it out, the moment you let yourself simply be in the not knowing, something shifts. The tightness in your chest eases, the pressure to have an answer lifts, and you realize that the chaos was not a problem to be solved. It was a process to be lived through. This is one of the hardest things to accept, because we are taught that understanding leads to resolution, that insight leads to change, that if we can just name the thing, we can control it. But the truth is, some things cannot be understood in the way we want them to be understood. Some things can only be felt, witnessed, aloud. And the calm after chaos is often the moment when we finally stop demanding that our experience makes sense, and we start allowing it to simply be what it is. You might notice this in the way you talk about your past. You used to tell the story with a clear narrative arc. This happened, then that happened, and that is why I am the way I am. You used to need the story to be coherent, to have a villain, to have a lesson, to have a resolution. But now, when someone asks you about it, you find that you do not have the same need to explain. You might say, I went through something and it changed me, and I'm still figuring out what that means. And you leave it at that. You do not need to convince them. You do not need to make them understand. You do not even need to understand it yourself. This is not avoidance. This is not denial. This is the recognition that the meaning of an experience is not something you arrive at once and for all. It is something that unfolds over time, that reveals itself in layers, that changes as you change. And the calm after chaos is the space where that unfolding can happen, where you're no longer forcing the experience into a box, but allowing it to breathe, to move, to teach you in its own time. Jung understood this deeply. He knew that the unconscious does not operate on our timeline. It does not give us answers when we demand them. It speaks when we are ready to hear, when we have created enough space inside ourselves to receive what it has to say. And often, that space only opens when we stop trying so hard, when we stop grasping for meaning, when we let ourselves rest in the not knowing. The fourth sign is this. You start to notice the small things again, not in a forced gratitude practice kind of way, but in a way that feels organic, almost involuntary. You are walking down the street, and you notice the way the light falls through the trees. You're sitting in your kitchen, and you notice the sound of the coffee maker, the warmth of the mug in your hands, the way the steam rises and disappears. You are lying in bed, and you notice the weight of the blanket, the softness of the pillow, the rhythm of your own breathing. These are not profound moments. They are not epiphanies. They are not the kind of thing you would tell anyone about. But they are significant because they signal that your attention has shifted. For so long, your attention was consumed by the chaos. It was pulled toward the problem, the conflict, the question, the pain. It was always scanning for the next threat, the next disappointment, the next thing to fix. And in that state, the small things were invisible. They were background noise. They were irrelevant. But now, in the calm after chaos, your nervous system has begun to settle. The hypervigilance has softened. The need to be on guard has loosened. And in the absence of that constant scanning, your attention is free to land on things that do not demand anything from you, that do not require analysis or response, that simply are. And in noticing these things, you start to feel a different kind of presence, a different kind of aliveness that has nothing to do with achievement or progress or healing. It is just the simple fact of being here, now, in this moment, in this body, in this life. This is what it feels like when the pattern breaks. The world does not change, but your relationship to it does. You stop looking for what is wrong, what is missing, what needs to be fixed. You stop waiting for the next disaster, the next disappointment, the next proof that you are not enough. And in the absence of that searching, you start to see what has always been here. The light, the warmth, the breath, the ordinary beauty of a life that does not need to be extraordinary to be worth living. You might pause and wonder if something is trying to get your attention. You might notice it in the people who suddenly appear in your life, or the opportunities that seem to come out of nowhere, or the books that fall into your hands at exactly the right moment. And you might not be able to explain any of it, but you feel it. You feel that something is moving, that something is shifting, that you're being guided, even though you cannot see the path. This is not magical thinking. This is not about believing that the universe is conspiring to give you what you want. This is about recognizing that there is an intelligence at work in your life that is deeper than your conscious mind, that operates through patterns and rhythms and cycles that you cannot control but can learn to attune to. And the calm after chaos is the moment when you become quiet enough to hear it, to feel it, to follow it. The eighth sign is this. You stop needing closure. You stop needing the conversation that ties everything up, the apology that makes it okay, the explanation that makes it make sense. You realize that some things will never be resolved, that some relationships will end without a clear ending, that some questions will never be answered. And instead of feeling frustrated or cheated, you feel a strange kind of peace. You realize that closure is not something that comes from the outside. It is something that happens inside you when you stop waiting for the other person to give you what you need and you give it to yourself. This is a profound shift because for so long, you have been holding on to the belief that you cannot move on until you get closure, until you understand what happened, until the other person acknowledges the harm, until the story has a proper ending. And so you have been stuck, waiting, replaying the same scenes in your mind, imagining the conversation you will never have, hoping that one day they will reach out, that one day they will see, that one day they will give you what you need to let go. But now, in the calm after chaos, you realize that waiting for closure is another form of the old pattern. It is another way of giving your power away, of making your peace dependent on someone else's actions, of staying tethered to a story that is already over. And the moment you stop waiting, the moment you decide that you do not need their apology or their explanation or their acknowledgement, something inside you releases. The weight lifts. The story loses its grip, and you are free. This does not mean you forget. This does not mean you condone what happened or pretend it did not matter. This means you stop letting it define you. You stop letting it control your present. You stop giving it the power to keep you stuck. And in that release, you reclaim yourself. You reclaim your energy, your attention, your life. You might notice this in the way you talk about the past. You used to tell the story with a certain charge, a certain edge, a certain need to make sure people understood how wrong the other person was, how much you were hurt, how justified you were in your anger. But now, when the story comes up, you tell it differently. You tell it with a kind of distance, a kind of neutrality, as if you were describing something that happened to someone else. And you realize that this is not because you have repressed the pain or bypassed the healing. It is because the pain has been integrated. It has been felt, witnessed aloud. And now it is simply part of your story, not the whole story, not the defining story, just one chapter among many. Jung spoke about this as the process of integration, the work of bringing the shadow into consciousness, of acknowledging the parts of ourselves and our experience that we have been avoiding or denying, and allowing them to become part of the whole. And the calm after chaos is often the moment when this integration becomes possible, when we're no longer so identified with the pain that we cannot see beyond it, when we have enough distance to hold it with compassion, to see it as part of the larger pattern of our becoming. The ninth sign is this. You start to feel okay with being misunderstood. You stop trying to control how people see you. You stop crafting your words